Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Tonight we are diving into chapter 7 of the book of Jubilees. So let's get started.
All right, chapter 7, verse 1. And it says, In the 7th week, in the first year thereof, in this Jubilee, Noah planted vines on the mountains on which the ark had rested, named Lubar, one of the Ararat mountains, and they produced fruit in the 4th year. And he guarded their fruit and gathered it in this year in the 7th month. And he made wine therefrom, and put into vessels, and kept it until the 5th year, until the first day on the new moon of the first month. And he celebrated with joy the day of this feast, and he made a burnt sacrifice unto the Lord, 1 young ox, 1 ram, and 7 sheep, each a year old, and a kid of the goats, that he might make atonement thereby for himself and his sons.
In these first 3 verses, I'm already seeing something pretty interesting. So we get some details to the story that we don't get in the book of Genesis, which is, when we read the book of Genesis and we hear about him leaving the ark and drinking wine and, getting drunk and that sort of thing, I'm just assuming that happened immediately, like right afterwards, right? Like he's like, okay, we just went through some mess. I need to toss one back, right? But that's not what this is saying. This is saying that, I mean, it took years. He planted the fruit trees and vines or whatever, and 4 years went by, and then another year to make the wine, to let it do what it's supposed to do. So again, we know that this is fermented wine. This isn't just grape juice, right?
Yep.
Obviously, because he got drunk. We know how that part of the story goes. But the purpose of the purpose of the wine in the first place was not just to have wine to drink. It's telling us that this is being prepared for atonement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the feast of atonement that's being celebrated here. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is very cool. All right, let's jump into verse 4. Penny prepared the kid first and placed some of its blood on the flesh that was on the altar which he had made, and all the fat he laid on the altar where he made the burnt sacrifice, and the ox and the ram and the sheep, and he laid all their flesh upon the altar. Verse 5 says, And he placed all their offerings mingled with oil upon it, and afterwards he sprinkled wine on the fire which he had previously made on the altar, and he placed incense on the altar, and caused a sweet savor to ascend acceptable before Yahuwah his Elohim.
Yeah, so now I kind of have something interesting that, as we're starting to look at this whole thing as the atonement, and as, this temple practice so far back in the story, and, without the long prescribed version that we see in, Leviticus that would have happened, further now in the future from this point. So, we definitely understand that there's some offerings going on, there's some sacrifices, and the things that of heaven are already occurring on earth. And like we brought up earlier with the wine, these God provided for all of this stuff. So apparently he must have had some kind of seed on top. We think of all the animals on the ark, but he
Right.
would have had some seed to then plant, right? It wasn't like it was just magically seeds are floating around. So
Right.
it's really interesting that, whenever we see, like in Egypt, after Exodus, he provided for them all that they needed. And here, same thing, he's providing that they had the new lambs, because they said they only were a year old. Well, this is 4 years or so past the time that they jumped off the boat. So these are new animals that are being produced. These aren't, the exact same ones from the boat. These are new
Right.
vineyards that are being planted. So God, in his, preeminence, knew what was needed and what would have been needed. And he was obviously hoping that Noah would follow through, being that he was the righteous one, the family that got saved from the whole water fury and all that good stuff. So it is really cool to see how that plays out for us.
Absolutely. And something else I'd like to mention on this also is that we're seeing Noah working as a priest here, as a
Yep.
high priest, with the offering of knowing exactly what to do with the animals. So again, we're not having to wait till the story later on in the Torah with Moshe and the Levitical priesthood or anything like that. So once again, we see evidence of the priesthood that Noah already knew. He already knew how to cut the animals, how to place them on the altar. He knew everything that needed to be done.
Right.
I think that's a cool thing that we can pick up on this all the time as we read through Jubilees. We're going to see even more of this as we go along.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. The role of the high priest being shown throughout this whole thing is really cool. So that's a big deal. But Jonathan, I want to go back to your point, man. So even in Jubilees here, where we get a lot more detail about what's going on in this story than we do in Genesis, we still have pieces that are being alluded to, but not necessarily told to us,
Right.
right? Like the point about the seeds, right? So that's something that he had to have had.
Hmm.
That's something that would have been taken with him on the boat,
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. Really
They were
cool.
they were prepared.
They were very
Abba
prepared.
had a plan, and the plan was working out perfect. Because the other part of that too, real quick, that we know that what he was doing, he knew how to do, is because it says in the end of verse 5, it says, "And the sweet savor extended acceptable before Yahuwah." So the
Hmm.
Father actually saw what he was doing and said, "This is acceptable, what you're doing, unto me." So that was really cool.
Very cool.
All right, let's pick up in verse 6.
All
And it
right.
says, "And he rejoiced and drank of this wine, he and his children, with joy." Well, I guess if we were having some wine, we'd all be joyful, wouldn't we? Verse 7 says, "It was evening, and he went into his tent, and being drunken, he lay down and slept, and was uncovered in his tent as he slept. And Ham saw Noah his father naked, and went forth and told his two brethren without."
So again, just to reiterate, I know I kind of already brought this up. 5 years have gone by. Just pointing that again out again to remind the viewers that there's some
The
things that
timeline.
have gone on. Right. There's some things that have been going on. We do have that timeline to look at. So
All right, let's pick up in verse 9. And it says, "Shem took his garment and arose, he and Japheth, and they placed the garment on their shoulders and went backward and covered the shame of their father, and their faces were backward. And Noah woke from his sleep and knew all that his younger son had done unto him. And he cursed his son and said, Cursed be Canaan, and his slave servant shall be unto his brethren. And he blessed Shem and said, Blessed be the Yahuwah of Elohim of Shem and Canaan, shall be his servant." Verse 12 says, "And Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, and Elohim shall dwell in the dwelling of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant."
So here, what we were reading about what happened with Noah and his drunkenness, right? So I think we've always, and I say we, I'm looking at myself, read the story, and you get so many different ideas of what actually occurred there. What Ham went in and saw, what occurred, who was in there. You hear about the mom, and it may be an unnecessary relationship or something that would have been super taboo in any time in history. And we
Mhm.
get all these weird kind of unnecessary stories. And I think we get to that point because we're missing details or we don't have details. So we like to add in. We like to over fantasize what could have happened. We like to look at the words from 20 different versions of the Bible, and they all kind of say something a little funny or a little different. We're here. I love that it gives us such a clear cut answer. His daddy was uncovered. They got him covered up. Ham should have taken care of business the first time, and he didn't. Instead, he snickered and went and told his brothers. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like a simple answer there. There's no extra relationship going on there. There's nobody going way out of the marital lines or anything. Like it's bad enough as it is. To add all that to it seemed unnecessary, and then when we read it here, it's not included. So I think that's a cleaner, more simple version of just exactly what happened.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one, Jonathan, that through all the years of our Torah studies, there's been all kinds of different thoughts injected into what exactly happened. Like you said, inappropriate relationship with his mother, inappropriate relationship, or not, I would say relationship, inappropriate behavior with the father. Because we were taught that when someone's nakedness is uncovered in the word, that's usually referring to doing something you should not be doing. We'll just keep that
Mhm.
PG, okay? But I agree with you that because usually with Jubilees, what we're going to get is we're going to get an infusion of a little bit more there to the story. It usually gives us a little bit more detail, but these details of this story, this account here, is the same as Genesis.
Hmm.
It to me, I agree with you. I think it's something that's very simple that doesn't need to be read into anymore. It's as simple as, guess what? He tied one on. He got drunk. He laid in his tent naked. His son walks in and sees it. Instead of being see, here's the thing. I think the respect part, he wasn't honoring his father. And so when he walks in there and sees his daddy naked, the right thing to do would have been what? Go and cover him up. But instead of covering his dad up, he goes outside, gives a report to the brothers, and thinks this is one big joke. So to dishonor his father. And so I think that's where all this begins right there, is with the whole dishonoring of dad in this, and therefore leads to the cursing of his grandson.
So I've got a little bit of a different opinion, and the reason why, I don't remember who did it, or what their basis for this, but the basis does kind of go along the lines of him uncovering his father's nakedness, referencing, and again, we're trying to keep this PG, but in referencing to doing things to his father physically that he should not have done, male with male, that sort of stuff, right? Okay, so I think we all know what we're talking about here. And one of the things that's lending to that idea from here that doesn't seem to be so plainly written for me is in verse 10. It says, "And Noah awoke from his sleep and knew all that his younger son had done unto him, and cursed his son and said, yada, yada, yada." Right? So, I don't know about you guys, but when I sleep pretty hard. In addition to that, I know in my younger days, I've tied one on once or twice.
Yeah.
And a drunken sleep is a deep sleep. You don't really know a whole lot that's going on while you're sleeping, let alone when you wake up knowing what has happened, unless there's evidence that something has happened. So for Noah to wake up and know what has been done unto him leads me to believe that something was done unto him, not just his son snickering and going and telling his brothers. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
again, now I have to put some assumption into that to go down that line of thinking. But maybe we can do a little bit more digging into this, um, into the original language, and hopefully come into some better understanding of this, maybe. But that's just kind of where I'm at. So um, I'm okay with it either way. You know, regardless of what the reason for cursing was, it lends me to believe that something more happened than just kind of a I see you, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, the only other thing I would inject in that, Kyle, is possibly, because we have breaks in here. I don't think it's a continuous flowing story, because we have the two sons who had walked backwards and covered their dad. So afterwards, when he woke up, they could have said, "Hey, Dad, by the way, we need to give you this report of what Ham's done." And so
Possibly,
it could be, one way or the
possibly.
other.
And again, with that scenario, we still have to assume that happened,
Right.
right? Because we don't have that written in the text that tells us that they told his dad or
Right,
their
right.
dad,
I think that's that gray area that we don't have a
right?
clear, definitive answer for any of that. So,
Right.
Well, and we do have the reference of them, oh yeah, and then they drank blood, so they
Yeah.
wasn't like they were always doing what they were supposed to do perfectly.
yeah,
Right. Okay, so I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there, and
yeah,
hey guys, if you have a different thought of what could have potentially happened in this scenario, please let us know in the comments, because we'd like to
absolutely.
explore all options. So
Yeah. All right, let's go to verse 13. It says, "And Ham knew that his father had cursed his younger son, and he was displeased that he had cursed his son. And he parted from his father, he and his sons with him, Cush and Mizraim, and in put in Canaan. And he built for himself a city and called its name after the name of his wife, Neelatamauk."
okay, so let me ask you guys this. This up here we're seeing in verse 13. This says Mizraim. Is that the same as Mitzrayim?
Possibly, sounds like it to me. It's in that same region, and it's down south.
Is that where we get Egypt from?
Mm.
It's looking like it.
Okay, just wanted to point that out.
All right, let's go to verse 15. It says, "And Japheth saw it and became envious of his brother, and he too built for himself a city, and he called it its name after the name of his wife, Anatonesis. And Shem dwelt with his father Noah, and he built a city close to his father on the mountain, and he too called its name after the name of his wife, Sequatelaba. And behold, 3 cities are near to Mount Lubar, Setelabaqua, fronting the mountains on its east, and Netelemaca on the south, and Antennesis towards the west. And in verse 18, these are the sons of Shem, Elam and Ashur and Arpachshad. This son was born 2 years after the flood in Lud and Aram. The sons of Japhet, Gomer and Magog and Mandai and Javan, Tubal and Meshech and Tyrus. These are the sons of Noah. In the 28th Jubilee, Noah began to enjoin upon his sons the ordinances and commandments and all the judgments that he knew, and he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness and to cover the shame of their flesh and to bless their Creator and honor their father and mother and love their neighbor and guard their souls from fornication and uncleanliness and all iniquity.
So, Joe, I'd like you to go back and reread all of those names for me, please. That was a tough one, huh?
I think I did better with the sons' names, okay?
You did good, man. You
All
did
right.
good. I think it's really cool. It says, and he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness and to cover the shame of their flesh and to bless their Creator and to honor their father and mother and love their
Wow.
neighbor and guard their souls from fornication, uncleanness, and all iniquity. So that is beautiful. That's the message that Yeshua gave, right? This is the breakdown of love the Father with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. So that caught me. I had to say something about that.
Amen.
Yeah, the one part that really made me that jumped off the page for me was that it said that Noah and his sons, he was teaching them the ordinances, the commandments, and all the judgments that he knew. And there's something about that word that he knew. It's not like he had this book that he had in front of him and he could teach from him clearly. He's like, according to this page on this right here, he's like, hey, this is all that I remember. This is, I got this information from, passed down from Adam and, down the list and Enoch and different, stories. This is what I got. So we're going to do this the best that we can, and we're going to try to, maintain the highest level of purity and observance to the law and the Father and His instructions that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a real beautiful story that some of us, as we're listening to this, that we can take to our heart and say we don't know everything perfectly, and we have the book in front of us, but He says that He did everything that He knew. So we definitely do have a level of importance to learn more, but also that what we do know, we're accountable to that, guaranteed. And I think that what he knew is what he knew, and it doesn't sound like in any shape or form that was a negative thing. Oh, well, he only knew so much, so that was shame on him. No, he taught him everything he knew, the best that he could. He was the best daddy he could be.
Yeah, and from what he's teaching right here, you would definitely. I mean, these are good things. Just like Kyle, I agree with you. These are like these are they're good.
Right. And I think it's also cool because this lends back to what was said earlier. Joe, I believe you brought it up with the sacrifice that was made, and it said that it was acceptable before the Lord.
Yep.
So in other words, what we're getting here is it wasn't like, okay, God, what do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? Right. And he's just following those instructions as God's telling him what to do. He's going back to memory. He's remembering those ways that he's supposed to follow, something that was already known. And he's doing those things. And the Father looks down and says, that's acceptable.
Yep.
Right. So you did good, boy. Right.
Man. Yeah. Something tells me that Noah's probably had a lot of influence from Granddaddy.
Yeah.
Some big influence there. So anyway, all right. Verse 21 says, for owing to these three things came from the flood upon the earth, namely owing to the fornication wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances went in whoring after the daughters of men and took themselves wives of all which they chose. And they made the beginnings of uncleanliness. Verse 22 says, and they begat sons, the Nephilim, and they were all unlike, and they devoured one another, and the giants slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Eljo, and the Eljo mankind of one man another. And every one sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moveth and walketh over the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imaginable imagination and desire of men imagine vanity and evil continually.
Yeah, so Joe, right there, what's really interesting here is we almost get like another, because we were talking about timeline and how this Jubilees is written and how it lines up with Genesis, and we do kind of get these interjections. Like clearly,
Right.
this
Yeah.
is something that happened prior to the flood.
Mhm.
So here he's getting all this praise and good attaboys. Hey, good job for teaching everything you knew. Good job for trying to set this up. Your sons have all started to move away and do their own thing. But he's like, but also don't forget how this all started, how this all played out. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the reason that some of these rules and things are set up. Why do we cover ourselves? Why do we not go on fornicating? Why do we not do these things? Well, let's look at what that led us to last time.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
if that's how we got to where we were, let's not do the things that get us there. And then so
Absolutely.
he almost is like reminding them, remember how bad this was? These guys made these guys, and these guys were eating these guys, and all this other stuff was going on. Remember the world got real crazy real fast? Yeah, that was due to just that one small sin led to another small sin, led to a big, and then and then we know how the story goes with the whole flood. But it's just really crazy, kind of interesting that it just throws that in there. It's just like, oh, by the way, here's the scary story again, just in case, so don't mess it up.
Right. Just to make sure you got this in your mind. Don't forget this. Look what you made me do. Right.
Right.
And,
I had
and
to get rid of all that.
yeah, and I'm thankful that we have these stories to look back to, because if we didn't, when Yeshua said, "Hey, guess what? In the end days, it's gonna be like the days of Noah."
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot more going on than just fornicating and sinning. There was a lot, I think what it talks about here in verse 24, and it says, "And after this they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moveth and walketh on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth." It says, "In every imagination and desire of men imagine vanity and evil continuously or
Mhm.
continually." And so, Kyle or Jonathan, I'm just starting to you guys. I'm of the belief that what was taking place also is what we're seeing today is there was gene manipulation going on with God's creation. That they were taking God's creation and destroying it. So what do we have happening today? The same thing. It was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Probably about 6 years ago, I shared an article at Divine, and I don't know if you guys ever heard this before or not, or maybe some of your listeners have. They've taken the DNA of a spider and put it into a goat
Mm-hmm.
for the purpose of getting more of the silk from the spider web, or from the spider excretes. So they figured out, oh, if we just take the DNA of a spider, we'll put it into a goat, and so when we milk it, we can actually extract abundance of the silk.
Mhm.
Because of the strength in the fibers and the material of it, that they make a lot of different things out of it. But at the same time, I thought this is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard of in my life. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a goat to begin with? The eyes of a goat are creepy to me to begin with.
Yeah, they're a
And
little,
then to think that there's
weird.
spider DNA inside this thing, I'm just waiting for the legs to pop out the side and they start crawling up and down the wall.
And isn't it just like the enemy to take something that's clean and make it unclean?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Absolutely. The other thing too, just real quick mention, was the Chinese have taken a pig and they've placed rat DNA in a pig.
Yep.
And so this is another article I shared probably about 3 years ago or so. And again, you're like going, why? And they
Right.
and they claim that it's supposed to make the meat leaner somehow by taking rat DNA and putting it into the pigs. And I just think they're just taking something that's, when you talk about making something unclean, or just taking something that's unclean and making it even more unclean. It
Right.
also brings me to the prophetic word that was spoken. You guys help me out with this. I'm trying to remember, it was in Jeremiah or Nehemiah or somewhere, where it talks about, and they were eaten of the swine and of the rat's flesh.
Ooh.
Familiar,
And,
yeah. I don't know the
and
reference.
so my thought was this: when I heard it, I was like, you know what? In the article, it even said in the article, "Hey, can you tell the difference between that pig right there that has rat DNA and this pig over here doesn't?" You sure can't. And
Mm.
so it just made me think of that prophetic word that was spoken of in the end days, the abomination of people eating of the swine and of the rat's flesh. And a lot of people say, well, I might eat the pig, but I would never eat rat. Well, technically, if you're eating that pig that has rat DNA in it, then you're eating both the swine and of the rat. What do you guys
Yep.
think?
Well, I think that we do have this idea of when we hear about sinned against the beast and the birds and all that moveth and walketh on the earth. We had this idea of them mating with them, right?
Right.
And I'm definitely not saying that that's not something that happened, because I do believe that that sort of
It
thing
probably
happened.
did,
But
unfortunately.
but I think this has a little bit more to do with the gene manipulation and the combining of these creatures. And the reason why I say that is because we do have this reference of much blood immediately after it talks about that. It says much blood was shed on the earth. That sounds like a lot of experimentation going on to me.
Hmm.
Kind of partly. And again, my mind's just kind of mulling through this a little bit. Um, and then it references immediately after that, and every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity. In other words, it's kind of like we're doing all of this stuff for the sake of our own well-being, right? It's so that we can be prettier, it's so that we can be stronger, it's so that we
Hmm.
can be, everything that we see these chemical laboratories supposedly doing today. you
Yep.
know it's the facial creams with 19,000 chemicals in it that you can't pronounce.
Yeah,
It's
like the
all
words in this chapter.
right, or all the so-called medicine that doesn't actually cure anything. It just removes symptoms. It's just things that um, make us feel better and look better, at least in our own vain imaginations. It does.
Exactly.
So we have this vanity that's being spoke of. I highlighted it here, and then right beside that, evil continually. So we have this imagination, or this desire of vanity, right? This beauty and this perfection and living forever, right?
All the
Yeah,
lies of the enemy right there.
right. A living forever without the Father, and
Mhm,
then and in doing so, the way that they're doing this is completely by pure evil
Hmm.
methods. So we
Yeah.
have the vanity and the evil continually. And unfortunately, I'd say yes, we are right on track with being in the same situation.
Yep.
Now, we may not have, giant creatures roaming the earth right now that we're aware of, that
Yeah,
we
that we're
know of.
aware of.
But they are definitely creating some abominations in the labs.
mhm.
You got that
So
right.
Yeah, so to jump in a little bit, I know we talked about the animals, we talked about men, but one of the things we got to, that we also have that we're dealing with, every day right now is, genetically modified foods, right? Everything we're eating is GMO'd. All the
Yep.
seeds, all of the, practically anything you can get in a store is genetically modified in one way or another. So, if we say, well, that's science fiction, or that's too far fetched, or whatever, we're doing it now. We're all, taking part in it some way or shape or form, and it only takes so long to where the vegetables stop growing or the seeds have a bad year, and then we the animals are going to be next. Well, how do we get these animals to super produce so we can have food, because we've run out of vegetables, because we ruin that too. The things that man puts their hands on can
Hmm.
mess things up, where God, when he makes things, they're always perfect. And kind of just one of the things I wanted to share, that as I was reading through it one more time, it was talked about the watchers and how they went against the law of their ordinance. And so that's
Hmm.
something that,
mm,
we're getting that kind of idea, and we're getting that concept again of God always has laws, and he has plans, and he has expectations, and they didn't hold to that. And then further down in 23, he says, and everyone sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of like the word there, sold themselves. We hear that phrase kind of thrown out flippantly today of, oh, they sold their soul for rock and roll. They sold their soul for whatever. Well, here it sounds like people are literally selling themselves for the
right,
purpose of working iniquity. And when you look at what is the word sold, it's a transfer of ownership. So, right now I'm the Father's. I'm one with Yeshua, right? Whatever he says, I'm going to do it. But these guys are saying, I sold out. I'm no longer in God's camp. I'm in the enemy's camp. He's bought and purchased me, and I got to do his will. And what was his will? To work iniquity and to shed much blood.
wow,
So there's a really fun but crazy but kind of gross aspect to that, where it almost seemed like there was a willing choice at some manner. And what that's just like what God says, we all have choose this day whom you're going to serve.
right.
And then they were sold, whether purposefully or they're by their own volition, somehow or another they changed camps, and God said that they all got to go.
Yeah, and whether this was a literal selling of the soul or not, I mean, technically that's what it is. They're They're taking their free will and willfully submitting it to the enemy for the purpose of whatever, this vanity or whatever it is. That's that's
just makes you think.
Well, I mean, it makes you think too about those in the end times. In Revelation, it speaks about those who receive the mark.
Yep.
And it's not. And here's the thing: not these people aren't receiving the mark against their will. I think the depravity of man and is going to get to the point where it's like you are going to take away all my comforts, my creature comforts. You're going to take away everything that makes me feel good. And it's almost like selling your birthright for some lentil soup. It's kind of like, well, what we gotta sign up for this, or we got to do this, and then everything's still good. I get to keep my house. I get to eat tomorrow. My kids get to eat. Yeah, no brainer. I'll just do it. No big deal.
Yeah.
Because their minds are going to be so far gone, they're not going to realize you're actually giving up your very soul to this system or whatever that's going to be at the end of the times. And so I don't think there's going to be a lot of people just. There will be those if we're still around, we'll say no, not going to do it. But there'll be those who'll be like, "You're dumb. Hey, just take the mark. Do whatever you want it. To keep my lifestyle, to keep everything the way it is." And unfortunately, gentlemen, we kind of seen this over the last couple of years with different scenarios where if you didn't comply, you may not have a job.
That's right.
You may not be able to retire out of the military. You may not be able to do blah, blah, blah. Oh, do you want to go back to the restaurants and eat, right? You want to go back to some normalcy, right? Well, just go do this and you can go back to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as simple as that, as just offering people back what they should have already had and not taken away from them. But now we're going to, oh, you want that? Oh, here you go. Just do this and you can have it all back.
And look how easy it was.
For a lot of people, it was like, oh, it's a no-brainer. Let's just do it. And so it's kind of scary because I believe, again, I think we're getting closer, gentlemen, to that time in history where, we're definitely ramping up. I will say that. I'm not going to, So. Anyway.
I agree. Yep. And on that note, guys, we got a lot more in store in part 2 of chapter 7 in Jubilees coming up. We'll see you then. God bless.
Shalom. Nekla Klamaku. Good Lord have mercy.
Okay, so
I can't even fake that one, man. Holy.
So when you go back into this,
Nekla Tamaku.